I waited for my turn. Everyone was very gracious to the people who were speaking there that day. When I came to talk, led by Senator Jacob Javits, all the senators marched out. They'd read my testimony. They didn't want to hear me. They'd read everyone else's testimony. They listened to them, but they didn't want to hear me. Willis Robertson, who was the chairman, had to stay there. He retired later and became a lobbyist for the bankers, which he was when he was in Congress. Now, he told me, look, Mr. Ney, you don't have to read that. Submit it for the record. We all know what's in it. I said, Senator, I said, if you wanted me to submit it for the record, you should have called me in California. I've traveled 3,000 miles to read it. I'm going to read it. He protested, but I began to read. There was a little murmur of applause. They wanted to hear me. That's what they'd come for. And all during my testimony, you'd say, will you please hurry up? Will you please hurry up? This never happened before to anyone testifying before a committee. When I finished, he stalked off, and there was tremendous applause. The reporters from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, other papers came up and interviewed me. They congratulated me. They were ebullient. The following day, I was dismissed by the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal had the bad taste to insult me and to finish its comment by saying, it is unlikely Richard Ney will ever affect the course of securities legislation. That was probably the biggest mistake the Wall Street Journal ever made on behalf of the New York Stock Exchange. Because I was determined to prove them wrong. They were right. But fortunately, I didn't know that. I thought I could prove them wrong.
Buzzy Krongard, the former executive director of the CIA, just happened to be the manager of Deutsche Bank. And so the profiteers from 911 were not Osama bin Laden or his band of U.S.-trained Arabs. They were blue-chip Israeli, U.S., and British businessmen. Within the first week, the 911 producers sucked up $40 billion in box office profits from U.S. taxpayers who were hypnotized, terrorized, and traumatized by the infinite reruns.
Well, of course. That meant that they were bypassing the banksters of the private bankers of the Bank of England completely. And so the Bank of England, of course, put pressure on Parliament in London to pass the various laws that basically meant, the Stamp Act and so on and so forth. And as part of these laws, they also prohibited the colonies from issuing this currency.
Since the Lehman crisis, the central banks have been carrying out so-called quantitative monetary easing. However, the vast sums being created as a result of this policy are being funneled only to financial companies controlled by Khazarian mafia honchos.
Oh, heavens, no. You point out Kennedy's executive order, I think it was 11,110 in your book Crossfire.
Mm-hmm.
And if I recall correctly, Jim, in Crossfire, you mentioned that Kennedy, in that executive order, which was signed in June of 1963, right, and that this order was to circulate $4 billion and a few hundred odd $1 million worth of United States notes into circulation. Well, I remember spending some of those United States notes as a child.
Cache of documents that exposes the complex trails that the elite around the world use to hide their money, and it doesn't just expose it. It doesn't just expose the patterns. It exposes a lot of very particular people.
And I want to ask you about that, Ryan. Here's the headline right now, and you can go into the resource well. We're going to push it into the resource well right now, so you can all go and take a look at the article. Secret Files Expose Offshore's Global Impact. What are the ramifications, Ryan? I'll ask you about some of the bold-faced names in a minute, but what are the ramifications of this information coming out into the public domain?
The best you could hope for is that this embarrasses enough governments that they get together and do something about it. Offshore tax havens are an existential threat to governments as we know them. The way and the speed with which you can move capital around the globe undermines governments' abilities to fund themselves. It's as simple as that. Right now, the United States government and other governments are able to collect enough revenue from their populations to function, but as inequality continues to yawn and wealth continues to roll up to the top, and the top 1% continue to find these ways to hide their money, then that fundamentally changes the government's ability to offer basic services as it does today. So cracking down on this is genuinely an existential question for governments around the world.
Who are some of these bold-faced names, Ryan, that stuck out to you in the reporting from the investigation?
Well, they found Mark Rich's wife, with
Denise Rich,
something like $144 million stashed in the islands. He's the one that famously lobbied for a pardon for himself and got it, though. You have Imelda Marcos's relatives. So, the government there wants to know what was this money that was stolen from the people. You have a ton of Russian oligarchs who are stashing their money there. More than 100,000 individuals, which is getting pretty close to not all of the people who are in this category, but it's a surprisingly small number of people who own an extraordinary amount of the globe's wealth. And so if you've snared 100,000 plus of them, that's a significant chunk of all of the people who are operating in this way.
To issue debt-free money. What often happened as a result was that the temple became more or less the de facto state bank, because the temple added the probity or the sanction, if you will, of the gods or of religion to the issuance.
God ordained us to be in charge of the money.
Number 21. The British Mint recently printed legal tender coins called the One True Ring and the Ring of Power. On one side of the coin is Queen Elizabeth II. On the flip side is the ring from Lord of the Rings. These legal tender coins printed by the British Mint raise the disturbing question, who is the real Lord of the Rings?
One ring to rule them all.
The inscription on the ring reads, "One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness of their ignorance find them."
secret societies. Because there were many that were looking, like I was saying, the Nazis. We really go back to the Thule Society.
Yeah, yeah. I can't say her name, Blavatsky and such. Yeah. So
yeah, well,
what gets me though is that you wind up with whatever it is they want to build and punch a hole or wherever, but you don't know what could come out the other side where you are. I mean, that's what kind of flips me out.
Well, let me show you where some of these theories have led.
Okay.
Because as I have found, each of these people involved in these situations are practicing Kabbalists, such as Paul Laffoley and many in the space program, like Jack Parsons, who founded Jet Propulsion's laboratory.
Yeah, they joke and say, they joke around and say the JPL stands for Jack Parsons Lab.
Yeah, and he has a crater on the dark side of the moon, right? These are no small people, and they practice a form of magic known as Kabbalah, which actually goes back to ancient Egypt, but it's traditionally classified as a Hebrew mysticism.
Isn't it interesting how all the secret societies and clubs, occult clubs, are in roughly the same area in Washington, D.C.? Whatever's Egypt got to do with the United States of America?
Well, as my time in America was drawing to a close, I decided to head into Washington, D.C., into one of the most renowned parts for Illuminati operations.
There's quite a lot going on around here, you know. It's no coincidence that these are all pentagrams. Because we're right outside the International Eastern Star headquarters, which is the female version of Freemasonry. Green Man, Sonunos. So it's strange, it all seems to be in one area, and it's a very privileged area of Washington, D.C.
Freemasonic symbolism that surrounds Washington, D.C. is absolutely undeniable. But today I was hoping to get a peek into a very specific place that lies right in the very heart of the capital city.
Well, there's your link to ancient Egypt. These are the secret societies, my friends.
Absolutely astounded to see that practically everything that we expose here on RSE had its place on the bookshelf of this Freemasonic library.
Washington, D.C. is a Masonic city. It's laid out by a Masonic cult. Every building is laid with its foundation stone by Freemasons. Freemasonry is Judaism for the Gentiles.
As I said, I was talking about these subjects back in 1962, before most of the people who now talk about it were even still in school. So consequently, I've looked at many different areas of conspiracy since that time. And I'm appalled at what I see happening in this country today. We are told that America is the land of laws, a nation built on laws. In point of fact, nothing could be further from the truth.
What is it that you'd like to see happen about all this?
Oh, I want to see those criminals forever off the bars.
Yeah. You haven't received any help, though, from within the Netherlands, you said.
Not one thing, and no, it is terrible. From 2004 on till now today, I have spoken with every policeman I could find. Spoken with every law official I could find. I've talked to Interpol about this. I've been to court to try to get a conviction of the prosecutor to investigate the matter. The court told me that it wasn't my problem, it was a problem of the society, and the court didn't want to give an order to the prosecutor to investigate. I have done literally everything to clear this up. I haven't, no, I have the idea that everything is stopped because Beatrix is involved.
Right.
And the Dutch court is involved. And every time some policeman wants to investigate, they slap him on the shoulders and say, don't do that because Queen Beatrix doesn't want it.
Keanu Reeves talking about, and this is a column, I just read the column, Keanu Reeves went over to one of these moguls' houses and they were talking about drinking blood, opens the fridge up and has 2 dead babies, one in the fridge. And Keanu Reeves breaks the dude's nose, busts a lot of crap in his house, calls the cops, and the cops don't do a damn thing. They act like he's crazy. Well, if you believe that shit, that the cops are just not going to do anything, you're correct, because they're in on it. If you don't believe Keanu Reeves, I mean, why would he make that shit up? He's living overseas now. Company making motorcycles. He wouldn't make this stuff up. That's kind of like a death threat. I mean, he can't even come back to the United States.
Brothers and sisters who are in America, and also for everyone around the world, as it does actually affect everybody, this information. Just a brief history on it. In 1948, a law was passed in America which said that the American governments couldn't use propaganda against their own people. And that was an act that was made, and it was very specific, and it said the government cannot use propaganda against its own people to, go with their own, to change their laws and to do specific things. This was an actual law that was passed. Okay, just some information that I've got, and I don't know how many people know about this or know that it's been passed, but in May of 2012, last year, a Texan Republican called Thornberry introduced the HR 5736, the Smith-Mundt Modernisation Act of 2012. Just going to explain to you what the act is, and then I'm going to read briefly a piece that I've found which explains rather well about it. Now basically what this act is back in 1948, after the wars, the American people started to wake up, just like they are today, and they started to realise that the governments are actually using propaganda against them to get what they wanted. So they were putting out false stuff, and just, you know, the people at that time were actually sick and tired of it. So this bill was introduced so that it couldn't be done anymore against the people and against the world as well. But in May of 2012, that law was actually amended. I don't know how many people know about this. Now, it was amended in such a way that I find it really shocking, especially in light of what's happening at the moment with the Sandy Hook and all those things there. So basically, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of what the new law now has added to, what has been added to it. So what they've added to it is that the government in America has power over the broadcasting in America. They are allowed to put their own information, to disseminate information. They're allowed to use they're allowed to use the press. They're allowed to use publications. They're allowed to use the radio. They're allowed to use motion pictures. They can put their propaganda over the internet. They're allowed to use other information media, including social media, and through information centres, instructors, and other direct or indirect means of communication. And also what they're going to be doing, they've also changed the act to say that the people who put all this stuff into the archives are just putting it straight into the archives, which means that propaganda and, lies that the government is telling is then being put into the archives. Basically, what this means, people, is for anything that the government want to do and they want to change, they're going to be using every format available to them to change your mind about an issue. For instance, what's going on today with the Sandy Hook? Now, reading this and knowing that they've got full, they've got full power over all broadcasting, filming. Okay, they can make films if they want to, right? They can go onto social media sites if they want to. So for those of you that know about the video that I've put up about the YouTube videos that are on a hit list that are talking about Sandy Hook and the cracks in the official narrative, it's the government that wants them off YouTube because we are actually messing up their propaganda. So there's a hit list at the moment for videos that are on YouTube, and they want them off because it's messing up all this stuff that they're trying to do. Obviously they're trying to take the guns off you guys in the USA, and they're using any means and forms that they need and they deem necessary, and that's what they're doing. And also it's changing history, because if you're putting false stuff into the archives, in 100 years' time, people are going to be reading that stuff. It's going to be available. And who in 100 years' time is going to know the truth about what was really going on in the world? And the fact that governments had to make films to try and change our minds. They made movies, and they were on the radio, and they were infiltrating our social media. So for people that say that there aren't government trolls online, and they say they're not, there aren't people that are doing that, and when we are calling them government shills and everything, look, the internet, they've infiltrated it. Social media sites, they have full power. So this was brought in May 2012. So you've got June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So we had 7 months after, you got the Sandy Hook happening. So this was rather, I think this was changed rather deliberately, because they knew what was coming up.
So the concept behind Stargate, and realize that at the end of every Stargate episode, they state, "We greatly acknowledge the cooperation of the United States Space Command."
Right. There is such a thing.
And, of course, the Department of Defense in the United States creative geniuses behind the television series, right? It's written by the military, for the programming of the public.
Now, there's a lot of history behind Makanda, and it had many names in the past. But one thing is certain, the village was incorporated in 1888. And it was first called Markanda, or Markans, Markata. These were iterations of this name with the word Mark in it. And of course, when you look at Mark the Evangelist, Saint Mark, they talk about the Church of Alexandria in Egypt, which he founded. Now they want you to think that all of this is by accident. But it is not, and that's where free thought comes in. Yes, Saint Mark was the patron saint of Egypt, the Church of Alexandria.
Darwin predicted the fossil record would present a smooth and gradual transition from one kind of organism to another, but instead we find sudden appearances of fully developed organisms. Not only are they not finding these quote-unquote missing links, they're actually finding new chains altogether. Even more damaging to the evolution theory than that, though,